Os doy la bienvenida a todos, bienvenida al curso escolar, digamos, después de estas vacaciones de Navidad. Os dijimos que íbamos a empezar el año con fuerza y así es. Estamos preparando un calendario de actividades, yo creo que muy interesantes, y debutamos con un peso pesado por la calidad del personaje, por los temas que se van a tratar. Hoy tenemos a Michele Geraci, que es un experto en economía china, un economista y político italiano, y aunque Michele es ingeniero electrónico, luego hizo un MBA por el MIT y se ha especializado precisamente en economía china, porque es un país donde se trasladó a vivir en el 2008. De hecho, nos conectamos con él desde allí, desde Shanghai, y bueno, como os digo, Michele es experto en economía china, fue subsecretario de Estado del Ministerio de Economía y Desarrollo del Gobierno de Italia y en su mandato, digamos, él es una de las personas que fue responsable del comercio internacional y de inversiones extranjeras. Está muy metido en todo lo que es este tema de comercio internacional. Y para moderar esta charla, para guiarla y para orientarla hacia los temas que realmente nos preocupan en el sector, tenemos a Luis Lázaro, que es Managing Director Retail and Logistics de Merlin Property. Yo creo que casi todos lo conocéis y no os voy a robar tiempo porque no es a mí a quien queréis escuchar. Luis.
Pues Beatriz, muchísimas gracias y muchísimas gracias a todos los que estáis asistiendo a esta aula preparada por la asociación. Como comentaba Beatriz, tenemos el inmenso lujo de tener con nosotros a Michele Geraci. Lamentablemente, bueno, aunque él domina el castellano un poco, creemos que va a ser mucho mejor para beneficiar tener la charla en inglés. Así que cambiamos de idioma y con eso empezamos a comentar. Michele, very good morning. It is a pleasure to have you here. Many thanks for being with us today. And welcome to this aula, this little talk about a very interesting theme, which is China, especially as we were commenting before, the very interesting week with all the data that is coming out and what it does affect to the rest of the world, basically. So I believe you will run a quick presentation, a very special presentation you've done for us about different data regarding the trade between Spain and China. And once that is done, we'll take it from there and start hopefully a good discussion for our associates.
Bueno, muchas gracias y buenas tardes a todos. Como tú dijiste, yo voy a hablar en inglés, creo que sea mejor, pero si alguien tiene alguna pregunta, la puedes hacer en español. Y ahora estoy en Shanghai, son las 7 de la tarde y ayer nos habíamos analizado los egresos del GDP de la China. I have two slides really that I want to show to you. One is about trade between Spain and China. And I want to show you numbers that are different from what you may have seen in official statistics, because we have done an analysis that takes into account not just the direct flows between the two countries, that is what mostly you would see in the official statistics, but everything that goes via the global value chain, supply chain, triangular flows between Spain, third country, and goods that end up into China, and vice versa, Chinese tourist purchases in Spanish retails that may not be included in the official export statistics because we have issues with recording the origin of the goods. We have issues related to European Union intra-flows. Sometimes the Spanish retailer sells some good to a Chinese tourist, but they declare it when they move from maybe Spain to France within the EU and only exit the European Union in France. And so it creates a lot of, let's say, problems with the statistics. And so what I want to show you now, I think it's maybe interesting from the usual statistics. How are these numbers different from what you've seen? Then I will show you just one graph on the GDP of China. And maybe I start with that because I want to give you some key points. Let me start with the GDP of China quarterly performance over the last 4 years. This is, of course, is the COVID downturn. This is the rebound. And this last point is the full fourth quarter of 2021. Now, you can see it's almost a perfect straight line from the trend from 2018. Quarterly data, 4% in the fourth quarter, a decline, because of course the growth cannot continue at high level. But remember, a lower growth rate out of a bigger base, it still means a lot. You know, the Chinese economy, I do a rough number, is about $15 trillion. And so it's a big economy. So if you think of, 4 or 5%, we always used to say it's almost as if, not anymore, every year, an economy like Spain, every year and a half, every 2 years grows out of the Chinese increase in the current year. So I would say quite a stable decline, nothing dramatic. And nothing is dramatic because we need to keep in mind that the Chinese economy remains a Marxist state-run economy. It is not a market economy like we think about it. The state has a big role. The state makes a lot of the investment and is the driver of everything that happens in the economy and in the society. And the role of the party is, of course, very strong in developing the economy. So this is very important. Why do I say that? Because we always ask Chinese to give us equal access, reciprocity, level playing field. And for them, while of course they say, yes, we would do that, it is almost as what we ask is against their constitution. The constitution is not about market. It's not about free access to foreign company. It's not about having foreign entities manage the interest rate curve, the consumptions, the technology development. This is not, cannot be outsourced to external entities. It must be run by domestic Chinese companies. So that's why it's always difficult when we want to penetrate the Chinese market to understand that we are fighting a philosophical obstacle. They do run the country as a Marxist socialist economy with a strong presence of the state. That does not mean egalitarianism. It doesn't mean everyone needs to be, let's say, equally with the same income. It's not communism in that sense, but it means that things should be fair and the direction of the country is not decided by the private sector, but by the government. And with this in mind, I think everything else that happened in the last few weeks, months, is clear. The crackdown on internet, the crackdown on IT companies, on education companies, English training schools, even trade comes within this umbrella. And I'm happy to discuss this later. Now, the slide I want to show you is the different statistics that we will have calculated just in the case of Spain. Let me move this. Can you see, I guess? Yes. So officially, sorry, this is a wrong slide. I didn't change the number. I beg your pardon. I should say, I apologize, Spain to China. Instead of having the usual 7 billion, that is only the direct flow, this is corrected, we should also include not just goods, but services. So the number goes a little bit more because Spain does sells to China services as well. I'm sorry, the slide is doing a little bit of... Then we have what I mentioned before, flows between Spain and China that goes via third countries, which I call it TEU, like the containers. And this is mostly goods, another $1 billion that adds to the export of Spain to China. Then we have another 4 billion, almost 5, of tourist purchases of Spanish goods anywhere in the world. So this could be a Spanish made in Spain good that gets exported into, let's say, a shop in Italy and is purchased by a Chinese consumer via these retail channels. So I do include these 4.8 billion in the flow of Spain exports to China, because in my model, in our model, Italy, the retail shop in Italy that sells Spanish goods to a Chinese tourist is actually acting as an intermediary. And in this analysis, we really want to show the strength of Chinese consumption on made in Spain goods, regardless of who sells them, who acts as intermediary. So I bypass the presence of the Italian retailer and I put this 4.8 billion into the flow. So if we add this all together, from 7, we reach more than 14 billion. So we have already doubled the importance of Chinese consumers for made in Spain goods. What are these goods? We then further divide them into intermediate and final goods, because it's important to understand what are the Chinese consumers doing with this made in Spain. And the split is about 9 billion is intermediate products that China purchases and puts them into other final product of themselves, and 5.3 is the final product. Now, we also know that not all exports is truly made in the country. So it's not all made in Spain. And so when we do analysis of global value chain, we divide what is the domestic value added from the foreign value added. So things that Spain makes in Spain and sells, and this is about 11 billion, and things that Spain buys from other countries and resells them to Chinese consumers. Just like in the example that I made about Italy, now Spain acts as an intermediary. And this 14 billion of total Spanish exports to China is then divided into 11 coming from made in Spain truly, so DVA, domestic value added, and about 3 is foreign value added. So this total, what do the Chinese do with this 14 billion? They don't all consume it. 12, they actually consume it. And the other 1.7, China actually re-export to other countries around the world. So we are trying to follow, and I'm trying to make it very simple, a very, very complex value chain of intermediate flows, trying to compress into one slide. This is not all. We have one more flow, which is what Spain sells to other countries that then reprocess these Spanish goods into bigger end products. So there are some made in Spain components that go to Germany for 1.3 billion, to France 900 million, to Italy 500 million, 500 million, that then these other countries repackage it into something else. And this is another flow, again, not captured by the official statistics. Of this almost 10 billion, 9.8, we also have a split between what is truly made in Spain and what is really acquired by Spain from other countries. Most of it, 5.2, is made in Spain. So I add this all together. I have the 14 from before, these other 9.8 components by third route, and I have another split of what the Chinese do with this 9.8 billion. They don't consume it all. They consume only 7.6, and another 2.2 they re-export. So the total Chinese consumption of goods is the 12 billion from the 14, plus the 7 from the 9, that gives me 20 billion, with the rest being exported to other parts of the world, a lot actually, 4 billion. So China acts as a trading partner of Spain for goods that they buy from you, but then they resell it to other countries, and it's a lot, 4 billion. and something goes back to Spain as a re-import. So overall, and I finish here, we started from roughly 7.5 billion of export officially from Spain, from Spain to China. By the way, these are numbers from 2019, because I don't want to use 2020, which is chaos, and 2021 even more. So, because I want to give you a structure of the flow, not just the values. So we started from about 7 billion and we end up to 20 billion. So basically the importance of Chinese consumers for made in Spain product is 2.5 times higher than official statistics which suggest. It's not 7.6 billion, it's actually 20 billion. And if we include also what China re-export, those 4 billion, we have a total purchases of by Chinese of Spanish goods that is 24 billion. So why do I show you this? I show you because this number is a big difference. So it's not 10-20% more. It's not, instead of 7, it's 8 or 9 or 10 billion. We're talking about a multiple, and this happens for many European countries. It happens for Italy, that officially exports 13, but in reality, China buys 38 billion, because we have all this integration of exports products that we do not record. And the reason is a mix because of this European intra-country lack of tracing, because we don't trace goods that flow within the EU. But luckily, we have the model that can actually do that. And by the way, this is a model we're working on with the WTO in Geneva and with the OECD in Paris. That is also useful when we look at the other side to also rebalance trade deficit and surplus. And we are using this, for example, in trying to also help, for example, United States and China that always worry about the trade surplus, the trade deficit, because when the numbers are different from the original ones, you would see that the dynamics are a little bit different. So this is for the slide that I have shown, and I'm happy to talk about this. One other thing I want to say, and then I stop and we open up for Q&A, is I think, remember what I said at the beginning, it's a state-run Marxist economy. I know you're curious about real estate. I tell you my view. China does not have a real estate industry crisis. In China, there are some real estate companies that have a crisis, but not the system. And please remember this of this conversation. There is almost ever, never a systemic problem for China. There are problems of companies, there are problems of sectors, but never of the country, because the government steps in and rescues what they think, what they believe should be rescued. In a way, the Chinese government every day does what we did during the 2008 financial crisis. If you remember, the Federal Reserve in the United States called up all the banks into one room, and overnight they decided, you get saved, you go bankrupt, sorry, you get a haircut, you have to fire people, you will buy this other company, and that's it. The Chinese government does this almost every day. So just like we avoided a systemic financial crisis, but some banks went bankrupt, Lehman, Bear Stearns, and others, almost Merrill Lynch. That's exactly what happens in China. They do it regularly. Some companies go bankrupt. You may lose a lot of money. Bond, equity investors will lose money, but very rarely this has systemic impact. That's why you should not wait for the so-called Lehman moment in China, because it's really hard to happen. China has the power to decide the exchange rate, the value of the renminbi, the yield curve, the interest rate, monetary policy, the budget deficit, trade, tariff, FDI. So they control current account, capital account. They even control wages. They manage the consumption of individuals. They can, via a policy of interest rate, and monetary other tools. They can manage by how much wages can increase, and therefore they can manage the consumption, and they can direct the consumption to one or the other sectors. They can crush companies if they think those companies are becoming too big. So the internet crackdown was not because they want to hit Alibaba. Chinese government does not have a problem with Alibaba. They have a problem with companies that cross the line between micro and macro. Alibaba was successful when it was managing e-commerce. But when Alibaba started to mobilize customer deposits, so the people who put their savings in the prepaid cards of Alibaba, and that means that Alibaba starts to compete with the central bank on deciding the interest rates for deposit. That is a very dangerous environment to be in, because it means that Alibaba is doing the job of the Chinese central bank. And just like I told you, this is not allowed for foreigners. That's why you can never have a completely open financial market, because China will never let people in Wall Street manage the interest rates. Similarly, for Chinese company, the Chinese government will not let individuals, Jack Ma or Alibaba, to manage the yield curve, the interest rate curve of the country. They can make money, they can collect some data about consumers, but not about everybody. That's also a stepping into a territory which is dangerous when you start having 5-6 terabytes of data every day on people's movement, people's activity, what they buy, because of course they run mobile payment, e-bikes, and so on, bike sharing. And so basically they know everything that everyone does every day. This is okay if you do it for 200 million people. If you do it for 600 or 700 million people, so for half of the population or more, then you have crossed the line between micro and macro, and this is not allowed. So I want to kind of clarify this principle. There is not a anger against the big companies. There is not anger against the rich people. There is not anger about individuals. There is just the issue that the development of the country must be managed by the Communist Party, not by private individuals, because they fear, and I think they are right, that outsourcing the management of the society to private companies will create imbalances. China is a developing country with 400 million farmers. Some people have low education, some people very high education. There is differences in the geography, in income, by province, by jobs, and they know that the private sector would not be able to smooth this difference but concentrate on the key consumers and leaving behind those others. That would create income disparity, social unrest. So the government says, no, I manage it like Sim City, if you remember these old games, to make sure that people would all try to benefit and get a share, a fair share of the pie that only a centralized economy can guarantee, not the private sector. So this is the philosophy, and I think this is important to bear in mind when we talk about how to penetrate the market and what is the role also of Chinese companies in both China and abroad. 12:30, I stop, okay, because I think too much for now.
Very good, thanks, Michele. Very, very interesting topic. Very, very kind to share with us this new view about the trade between Spain and China, or from Spain to China. Although obviously the other way around has a very, very bigger numbers, obviously. So if I understand you correctly, I mean, we've been seeing in the press before Christmas about the real estate Evergrande crisis, to point you out about just big companies in the state of the market, but the press and the journalists were trying to compare that to a real estate crisis and how will that affect Europe, Spain overall. So in your view, that will not have an impact or an effect into the real estate markets in Europe and especially in Spain, to our case?
It's true, yes, that's what I think, because this is not a systemic problem for China, and it has a very little contagious effect to the other economies. It's not like Lehman, because we are disintegrated from China on the financial market. We have a very strange situation. We are integrated on trade in global value chain a lot, but very little in finance. And China understands this. China does not want to integrate financially. They don't want to open up the financial market to foreigners. They don't want to open up, and so they will, because otherwise they would not be able to rescue their own companies. And I just pulled up the other figures that I think you indirectly asked. That's the reverse from China to Spain. So it's not 26, it's 34. The difference is not as big as the Spain to China, because let's say the tourism side dominates the delta. Let's say there are more Chinese people that buy Spanish goods than Spanish consumers that buy made in China in Italy or in England. And so the delta between China into Spain is 8 billion from 26 to 34, but it's not 2 times, it's only 50% more.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Yeah, you should expect the bigger gap on those, but I understand where it's coming from. Just to change a little bit the subject. With we've seen obviously an actual energy crisis, especially obviously in pricing. We've seen some supply shutdowns in some of the Chinese cities, and we are seeing the inflation on the industrial materials. Overall, that creates a slowdown in product production in China. Do you think, and I've read some articles from some journalists as well, do you think it is time to start for Western economies to start to look for another world factory?
I think it's going to be very difficult. And I know that there was a tendency maybe 4 years ago to move some of the production from China into other countries. Vietnam, it's a classical example, Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on. And there are 2 dynamics here that we need to understand. One is that China did that to bypass trade tariff. So instead of being made in China, the goods were made in Vietnam, and so they could bypass mostly US trade barriers. In fact, Vietnam has one of the biggest trade surplus with the United States. So when Trump realized this, he said, wow, I need to put tariff also on Vietnam, which didn't make people in Vietnam very, very happy. That was a technical triangular way to bypass this. And by the way, China does it a lot in Hungary to do goods which are made in EU. So they completely bypass any potential European Commission trade sanctions or barriers to China. So there was a tendency to do that. But the other problem to outsource a factory in other parts of the world is that, I tell you, after 15 years living in China and traveling around Asia, the infrastructure, the logistic, everything that runs around the manufacturing is unparalleled anywhere else in Asia. So you may have cheaper labor in Vietnam, but then the goods don't travel. We have high-speed train in China, 40,000 kilometers, always on time. You have sea routes, big ports. You have logistic company that deliver goods, subsidized by the government. Sometimes, often, you cannot make money if you send a parcel from one city in China to another one for 25 renminbi, like 3 euros. It's very cheap. But the Chinese government subsidizes those sometimes shipping, but also delivery company, because they understand that with a little investment compensating the delivery company, they can actually generate a surplus in the development by allowing people who use those things. I take an example. I need a new camera for the video call with you, and I can click on the internet on my mobile phone, and in half an hour, I have a guy delivering the video camera downstairs from my home, and for almost no price. A activity which is subsidized by the government, because they know that if I talk to you guys for 1 hour, the value that we create in this video call, well, I hope, I'm not sure, it's more than the value of the webcam. And that's how the GDP grows, by providing cheaper input to people that make a better use of those. So I don't, I'm not a believer of the factory moving elsewhere. Other countries really don't have the infrastructure. They don't have the logistic, and they don't have the strength of the government to provide and make sure that when there is a problem, it gets fixed. So I think there is a lot of returnees back to China now that the tariff thing has been discovered by America. So the trick doesn't work anymore. So there's no point in going to buy because Trump put tariff on everyone. So the infrastructure logic dominates the remaining into China.
Very, very clear. That's totally true. As you were commenting, we have not seen yet the full transfer of price increases, whatever it is, supplies, materials, shipping costs. We have not seen that yet being transferred to the final product. I mean, we have seen a lot of lack of deliveries in time, obviously, because of the pandemic and because of the increase in consumptions and people trying to gather a lot of products just to be safe. But do you think that someday the government will stop subsidizing those type of costs and will be transferred to the final consumer, and thus will that affect China's productivity and cost advantage?
Are you referring, sorry, mostly to the shipping cost?
Well, yeah, shipping cost, obviously. We have seen also inflation in materials, and we have also seen the energy and the rest of the supply increase.
No, but no, because for the similar reason that I mentioned in the example of the webcam, the way I think about the way they do it is like having an Excel spreadsheet where they need to solve for the maximum GDP output. And they will readjust whatever pricing mechanism, subsidies, transfer is needed to meet that goal. I'm making it very simple. Of course, the GDP is not the only goal, but just to give you an example. So if raw materials were to be very expensive, if energy were to be so expensive that the companies would need to stop or halt production, then they will subsidize it. They will buy gas from Russia. They will increase more coal, like they did in October. There was an energy glut, so bottleneck. So what did they say? 1 million more tons of coal. And I'm sorry, it pollutes. We will plant more trees. We will do more CO2 capture technology later on. But for now, we cannot stop manufacturing because we have a GDP goal to meet in 2021. So there's no way that the energy cost could have an impact on the system. Remember, it's always the system that is the priority. So they would do this. They even, how do you say, they even not made peace, but they don't talk too much about trade war with Australia. Their relationship is not very good, but if Australia sells raw materials, they'd be happy to buy it.
Okay.
And they don't buy the wine from Australia. That's forbidden. By the way, that's a great opportunity for Spain and for Italy, because Australian wine now is 210% tariffs. So now we have French, Chile, Italian, Spanish wine trying to grab this market. So even in the international relationship, they don't do a two-cool war. They do it for goods that are not relevant for the system. They don't care if they drink wine or not, but copper, yes. So from Australia, they do buy energy and raw materials.
Mm-hmm. Very, very clear view. That's very appreciated. just change a little bit more to the retail sector. I mean, we've seen all of the retailers going to omni-channel strategies. That affects obviously the supply chain models that they use. And we've seen also recent events of delivery failures coming from China to Europe, especially, and obviously affecting the China's production attraction to the rest of Europe. So obviously, I mean, you've explained a little bit already in advance what is the government doing for that, but maybe you can give us your view on how will that evolve in the future.
Well, for the Chinese market itself, you know, the retail consumers, if I understand the question correctly, two dynamics, I think important if we want to think of exporting goods to China. So from that point of view, it's very dangerous to make mistakes, very easy. We have seen, I've seen Italian companies, Dolce & Gabbana, fashion, making the wrong advertisement. And this was multiplied by the internet users. They aggregate very quickly to make something either successful or collapse. So there is this non-linear risk, if you want, a bipolar output that we need to be careful when trying to penetrate these markets. 1/3 of the economy is digital. Growth rate is a double digit. And we do, as I mentioned before, we don't have cash. I never carry cash when I travel with me. If you don't have a mobile phone, you cannot live in China. Like you cannot go, you cannot do anything. You don't have the app tracing to show your green pass. You don't have money. You cannot call a taxi. You cannot walk into the building. You cannot pay. You are stuck outside. And it happened to me once. Phone, no battery. You really have serious issues. Now, so everything I'm saying is to imagine. It's really pervasive, and it's subject to these swings. Because in 1 second, overnight, the mood of the consumer can change much more than we used to have when we had offline retail. So if you go to, for example, white goods, consumer goods stores, like Shein and some others, they're empty. Because white goods, they don't need so much of taste, trying. It's not like clothes that you want to try them on. They are kind of replacement goods. So for those, you go directly on online channels. For goods that are instead new, that you want to try for the first time, and then the offline market still plays a role. But then there is also a hybrid mode where people go to the shop to test the goods, and then they go back home and they purchase it online. So we do see a decline in the almost psychology of the offline stores, more into the online ones, very, very strong. And this is, it creates a really big problem for goods, for products, especially from West. We fall into the cultural trap. We don't understand how the dynamics of internet works in China, and it makes very difficult to penetrate those markets, and it makes a swing very, very easily.
Mm-hmm. And well, talking about digital, I mean, we've seen obviously the growth of Alibaba and the expansion of Alibaba versus Amazon. How do you think it will affect that fight to the overall physical retail world? I mean, obviously there is a pie to share. Will they be, as you were saying, everything, I mean, 1/3 is digital. That's fine. Obviously, in this type of economy, it's very, very new. Very modern. You need the digital tools to survive, basically. But do you think that fight will transfer into the rest of the world and affect retailers and moving a little bit to our retail sector overall?
I think it comes down to culture, and in a way, I don't see the same dynamics happening in Europe, for example. So from my point of view, I would be concerned, and it's good that, of course, we ask this question, but maybe what I've seen in Europe is that a higher threshold on privacy keeps the online to a limit. And we have seen this not just on retail purchases, but even during the COVID. You know, people would almost prefer to get sick rather than telling the government where they were going to do shopping in the supermarket. So we didn't have this app tracing application moving. Now, I think Spain is a little bit ahead of the other countries in that, so the risk may be higher. But because I think it's, in a way, countries like Germany, for example, put a higher emphasis on privacy. In Italy, everything government tries to, or even companies try to enter the sphere of the individual gets completely blocked. And this is a positive barrier for the, let's say, for the continuity and sustainability of retail. Now, having said that, if the giants like Amazon and Alibaba decide, and they will, to take on the smaller shops, I think this would be a big problem, because scale will dominates production cost, dominates profits, and is very little to compete on niche markets, because you can retrench to a life of a local community that you want to still be having a personal touch with the shop assistant. But I tell you, here in China, the orders are done by robots. I go to a restaurant, I don't see the waiter anymore. There's a machine that walks and talks to me. In the hotel, I order a coffee, the robot sends it upstairs. I don't know how he manages to walk onto the carpet, but they do it. Now, it's not everywhere, but these are attempts to replace some of those activities. So scale and everything, I think, is a big problem for retail, for small retailers, not for big ones. So I think there will be a separation of survivals and companies that will be in trouble, and scale will be the winner.
Understood. Yeah, quite interesting. We'll see how that evolves, and let's see how to our markets and to our shopping centers it does affect. Because we're seeing a very big growth rate in e-commerce penetration, and nevertheless, obviously, it's still 80-85% of the sales being physical and offline. Yes. Everyone's talking about the experience, about the digital world, about the omni-channel strategies, and I fully agree with you. It is a matter of scale. But nevertheless, obviously, people, especially in Mediterranean countries, as Italy or Spain, we want to be outside. We want to touch things. We want to socialize, and that obviously we need to take advantage of that way of living in order to make those as much survival as possible. Probably that's
in a way, I think also could be a good strategy to try to gain some competitive advantage by continuing to provide that personal experience. So the shop doesn't just sell goods, but offers an experience to the customer. And that can never be replaced by neither the machine, the robot, or by the large scale anonymous. You know, if you go, for example, in China to some of these big department stores, I'll give you an example, since you're Spanish. Zara in China has almost no one working in the shop. There is no shop assistant. You walk around, you try your clothes, the shoes, the shirts, and only in one floor of, hundreds of square meters, there's one person in the cashier that gets the money. There is no, and I don't, it's not like it used to be before. Sometimes I don't like it. Sometimes I miss the shop assistant, the camera. But I tell you, I don't know how is it in Spain, but you know, Zara here, almost, I'm exaggerating, but I want to give you the dramatic point. There are no people working inside the shop in Zara, and it's very successful because they went into the middle size, better than I. The quality, the price, fashionable, attractive, good price. And now, of course, they have a lot of problem with the supply from Turkey and so on, but that's the strategy that they chose, zeroing the cost of stuff.
It's not the case in Spain so far. There are some examples of some shops that have tried other brands to do very digital experience, and so far they have not been successful. But someday we'll see how that's evolved. But obviously, it is a matter of stereotype and the way of living. Probably that's some of the advantage that we as Mediterraneans and South Europeans have.
So the Mediterranean culture could save us retailers then.
That's totally true. I'm a true believer of that. You touched point, and we're about to finish. We have until 1 p.m. You have touched point on some companies getting outside of China and entering to the market. I mean, we've seen Bright Foods entering into a small investment in Spain through Michele Geraci or the GM Group, and obviously we've seen the technical companies or the phone companies, Xiaomi, Huawei, Oppo, enter into the market and competing in that sector. In some times, like Bright Foods, for a short period of time, that was probably not a successful investment. But do you think is there room for more? Is there room for many others? I mean, you've mentioned some of them. Is there room from some other retailers and from some other sectors than technology to move into the European markets, into the Spanish market especially?
I tell you, it's difficult because there is, and maybe this is good news for us, there is always a little bit of resistance to made in China products because we always have the idea that the quality is not as good as ours. And this is very important for certain consumer goods that may be, let's say, dangerous, or health related. So it's very easy to buy a mobile phone. You buy a mobile phone from Huawei, from Oppo, Xiaomi, and that will be perfectly okay. Very different if you buy maybe some food, because that would probably not be perceived as a better quality. One, because we have a strong culture, and two, because we maybe believe that their quality would not be as good as ours. So I think the potential exists to penetrate, but it would be in the things that China is good at, which is technology. And maybe, and for sure, and I know this will happen, automotive electric vehicles. Because at some point you will know that a made in China car by BYD, for example, is as good as any other. Geely did a joint venture with Volvo just to move into the Western market, Volkswagen and BMW, the whole JVs. So I think these are the next one, electric vehicles, because China will want to do it. And they will do it, and I almost know for a fact that they will invest in Europe on production of electric vehicles. So this is the next thing that would enter the European market.
Okay. Well, thanks for coming. We have a couple of questions. I think we've touched base from the audience. I mean, there is people trying to comment on the impact of CPI growth, the energy inflation cost that we're seeing, and obviously on the sustainability environment that we're living on, and the crisis that we are seeing going forward. I mean, you touch base on the decision on the Chinese government to whatever it takes. So far, they will put in some trees in the future, but so far, if coal is needed, they will act on it, because GDP is the key, as you were saying. And we also have a question about, I mean, you mentioned about the Marxist socialist regime and the way it works in China. Do you think there will be a risk of collapse like the same way we've seen in the Soviet Union?
No, never. Because Soviet Union had a little bit of a problem. You know, Stalin, I'm talking about economy, okay, not about the style of Stalin. But the 5-year plan that Stalin did were very successful in growing the Soviet Union GDP. It was very successful, but GDP was skewed to industrials. That's why people were hungry and the industry was flourishing. So the Stalin plan, and that's why the Soviet Union, in a way, entered into a crisis in the 80s, because while the GDP was doing well, the split between industry and consumer was in the favor of industry, because there was a Cold War mentality, and there was the idea, you know, inherited from machinery, kind of a industrial revolution 3.0. China understands that the model failed. In fact, and they are moving more to consumption. So the GDP, every time, and you know, I invite you to look at the GDP release yesterday, they always talk about disposable income. They always say GDP grew by X and disposable income grew by Y. So they have a lot of emphasis on showing that the GDP is then flown into the pockets of the people in what percentage. And there is really no reason why it would collapse. One, because there is no alternative, but not political, economic. You know, people income has grown by 150 times in 40 years. There is no, I say something very, maybe not true, but I want to emphasize it. I don't know anyone who is poorer now than it was 20 years ago. No one. Mm-hmm. In Italy, 87% of the population is poorer now than it was in 1985. 87% of the people in Italy are born 30 years later. In China, there is no one who is more poor now than it was before. Almost everyone has improved. Maybe, and for sure, some faster than others, the disparity has increased, but it's not like in the US, there has been no absolute decline in the life, in the standard of living of anyone. So, of course, the people really, I know this may be unusual, people do support the government, they don't care about the political voting system. In fact, even in these last years of crisis, they look at us with a little bit of, how to say, they say, well, guys, you are failing. You are not solving the COVID crisis, and you are not solving the economy. So that reinforces the perception in Chinese people that the government is the best they can ever have. And of course, not everyone. There will be 1% of the population who are unhappy. You have dissidents, you have people who complain, blah, blah, blah. But, you know, the system is very, very happy with the way things work. And they know, when they look at India, that without a centrally planned economy, you will not have the high-speed train that you have in China. You will have the train that we have in India. That's always they use. They always have this image of the train in India, which we know are not very comfortable sometimes. I've taken some are very comfortable, but not all. But in China, you have, you have the AVE, I don't know, Madrid-Sevilla, how much is it? 2 horas?
2 hours and a half, yeah.
In China, you have 40,000 kilometers of high-speed train, 250, 300, 350 kilometers per hour. You can do, I'm from Sicily, you can do with the Chinese infrastructure from Sicily, from Palermo to Berlin in 8 hours.
Yeah.
Now it takes 30.
Yeah, clear advantage. that's totally
That's
clear.
why it goes back to your question about the logistic and infrastructure and no collapse. This is a very important question. We should not look at the Chinese problem with the eyes of our Western, because if China was a market economy, it would collapse because the forces would pull things and destabilize it. They know this. That's why they keep a cap on all these levers: monetary, financial, distribution, income, poverty, vehicles, electric, green, everything. It's like it's like a sim city, sim world, sim country game, which you do manage. And I met many of the people in the government, and in a way, the disadvantage of not having free election, so people don't choose who is the Minister of Trade. The advantage is the Minister of Trade doesn't come from other sector. He's been doing trade for 30 years. We may not like what they say, but they are very, very competent. And I've seen this in 2 countries, and I guess what's the other one?
Yeah.
Russia.
Russia.
So you do give up democracy in exchange for real competence.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very, very good point to finish, a very good takeaway. I mean, we should not view China from our Western economy eyes, but obviously have in mind that it is trade control, but in the Western economy overall, or in the Western world, in the capitalistic world, very, very well taken care of it. That's the thing. Michele, thank you very much for this interesting exposition and discussion. We really appreciate it. I think everyone in the room or in the audience will find it very, very interesting, the same as I did. So grazie mille, and it's been a real pleasure to have you on our session.
Muchas gracias. Y cuando me vuelvo en Europa nos podemos encontrar, yo espero, en Madrid o en Roma para continuar la conversación.
That will be my pleasure. Thank you very much for your attendance, for being with us.
Chao, gracias. Bye,
Yes.
bye.
Bye. Gracias por asistir. Espero que lo hayáis encontrado lo suficientemente interesante. Es un personaje con una experiencia brutal sobre la economía china y conoce a la perfección todos los entresijos de la misma y cómo funciona el mundo de la economía china y su relación con el resto del mundo. Así que espero que lo hayáis encontrado interesante y nos vemos en la siguiente, que seguro que el equipo de la asociación está pensando ya en la próxima y será igualmente muy interesante. Muchísimas gracias a todos. Un saludo.